Hi everyone, this is the video for Friday, March 26th, the continuation and conclusion actually of the section on international trade or contemporary trade policy in Latin America. I am going to start sharing my screen, so I am going to continue where I left on Wednesday. The last section I covered had to do with the tables explaining how Latin America has been trying to insert itself into the globalization wave, jumping on the train, as we said last time. And also, I think this is where I stop. I also want to say a few words about the composition of the exports that Latin America has been able to achieve, which is not very encouraging. So on this chart, you can see that with the exception of Mexico, and that means if we exclude Mexico, at least all the way to 2001, I guess now you can add a few other countries that have been a bit more successful, like Chile, for example. We spoke about Chile already. With the exception of Mexico, and again, perhaps Chile, still in Latin America, the export of raw materials, primary goods, is one of the main exports. It's part of the export profile of Latin America. So in red, you have Latin America excluding Mexico, and in blue, you have Latin America as a whole, right? So here you have primary exports in the vertical axis, primary exports as a percentage of total exports. So, you can see that if you exclude Mexico, is very different, because now if you can compare it to the blue line, the ratio is going down. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that Latin America, although has tried to diversify, to increase the value added, it has not been very successful, with the exception again of a few countries like Mexico and Chile, because of the maquila industry, and because of Chile was able to again take advantage and identify the advantage first, and then take advantage of the situation related to the differences in the season between the northern and the southern hemisphere. Now, the important point I want to make here is that although Latin America has been able to export more raw materials, which again is not great, but better than none, it has not, this export level increase has not translated necessarily into economic growth, and certainly not economic development, because the few countries and the few industries that have been able to increase the amount of exports are very few, as I said, but also concentrated in very few hands. The benefits of these exports do not trickle down. They are not received by the workers in the factories, the farmers in the fields, the families in the cities. They typically concentrate in a handful of families that control these industries. And as a consequence, we are going to also start introducing the elements of, well, exporting people. Latin America has been really good at exporting people, meaning people running away from the conditions they experience in their home countries. In particular, economic conditions, lack of jobs or well-paid jobs, no benefits, really bad conditions. In some other cases, and even recently, we have cases in Central America like El Salvador and Guatemala, where it's not just about the economic conditions, but also the political conditions, violence. You have a lot of people being kidnapped, killed, sometimes just because of, they are bystanders of another conflict, or sometimes because of political differences, or sometimes just crime. The point is that in 2006, there was this number recorded, according to which around $40 billion were sent from the US to Latin American countries, mostly Mexico, in the form of remittances. So the remittances are the dollars earned by Latin American people working in the US, for the most part undocumented, and they are sending this money to their home countries, to their families in wherever they live. Again, sometimes, most of the time, we consider this the bigger percentage are going to Mexico. We're going to talk about remittances later. The point is that this is a manifestation of the partial failure of integrating Latin America to the globalization train, because although exports are going up, the benefits are not spreading across the population. And as a consequence, many people are fleeing their home countries, searching for better opportunities, because the model seems to be exhausted, at least in the view of many of these families that are actually willing to risk their lives, which is the ultimate cost. There is some studies. Here is one, Acosta in 2006, according to which for each percentage point increase in the share of remittances to GDP, the fraction of the population that escapes poverty is reduced by around 0.4%. So the point is that remittances can have a very powerful impact on poverty alleviation in some Latin American countries, especially those countries where the amount of remittances is so large that it represents, in some cases, the largest industry in the country, which doesn't make any sense because remittances is not even an industry. But for example, in Mexico, $20, $30 billion every year represents sometimes the second, the third largest industry after oil and tourism. In some countries like El Salvador, Nicaragua, smaller countries, the amount of remittances is so large that is representing the largest industry in the country, representing, a large percentage of GDP. So in those countries, the more remittances they receive, the larger the impact on the reduction of poverty. Now, we are going to talk about this later, because again, some countries and the politicians and leadership of some of these countries, although they claim that they don't want their national fellow people to leave the country, in a way, it's a beneficial way that they do. It's a beneficial thing that they do, because, well, they're receiving $40 billion every year. Anyway, I am going to come back to this later. In 1994, I think I already mentioned this, there was this attempt to expand NAFTA to the whole Americas, North, Central, and South America. And the idea was to spread the benefits of international trade, not just to Mexico, but everybody else. Obviously, that didn't happen. The FTAA was not signed. This was supposed to have happened in 2005. It did not happen. These links don't work anymore. I check, and they don't work anymore. But in these links, you could have seen when they were up how people in the US were opposing and people in Latin America were opposing for the same reasons. When you have international trade, we saw this in the theory, you're going to see expanding sectors, and those people that belong to those sectors benefit, but also contracting sectors. So the contracting sectors in the US, mainly low-skilled labor force, were complaining, no, we don't want this to get even worse after NAFTA. And of course, the contracting sectors in Latin America were complaining as well. Mainly, farmers, because they knew that like in Mexico, eventually they were going to lose their competitiveness, and like Mexico they could become a net importer of the goods and services that they should be producing. Anyway, there have been some efforts, failed efforts again, and this is a very interesting one. When Venezuela was at the cusp of the wave in terms of high oil prices, Venezuela was rich with resources. Hugo Chavez at the time, the president, was preaching integration, and this is the way to go, follow my lead. He proposed the so-called ALBA, the Spanish you can read there, Alternativa Bolivariana para las Américas. So the idea of ALBA was not so much a trade agreement, but some sort of a scheme of collaboration, some sort of a agreement where the idea was to promote social, political, economic integration, not necessarily competition through international trade, but helping each other, So, for example, one of the initiatives of this ALBA initiated in Venezuela was the Petrocaribe. So get this, the idea of Hugo Chavez was, we are rich right now. We want to launch this ALBA initiative, and we are going to help you with this program called Petrocaribe. This is 2005, before things went south, right? So the idea was that Venezuela, with the help of other countries that wanted to join forces, and everybody in Latin America was invited, they were going to help other countries not in such good shape by selling them oil at low price. If they didn't have the money to pay, credit, low interest rates. If they didn't want to get engaged in credit, they could pay in kind. So a country could, pay with bananas, with sugar, with anything they had. So they didn't have to even sell it in the international market to generate the foreign exchange, and with that money pay for the oil to Venezuela. No, Venezuela said, no worries, just send me in containers, send me your sugar, your bananas, your pineapples, whatever you have, and we're all gonna give you oil. Of course, obviously, oil is very important, guys, and this is a very important bargaining chip because, well, things are changing now because of technology, but in the 2000s, thinking about sustainability and alternative sources of energy, if today they seem distant, well, 20 years ago, they sound like, okay, this is like way down the road in the future. Petrocaribe failed, ALBA failed because the price of oil collapsed, and Venezuela couldn't deliver. Many people believe that it was a noble idea. It was an interesting effort. Unfortunately, once again, the main, or one of the main weaknesses of this initiative was to bet in the price of oil. Many of these ideas were fundamentally tied to the price of oil. Guess what? Dutch disease all over again at the regional level. So things didn't work. But it's important for you to know that this actually took place, had a lot of traction, and well, didn't work. All right. Now I am going to switch gears. This is where I was supposed to start today, but last time I didn't have time to finish what I said in the last, 10, 12 minutes. Why is that people in Latin America fear so much about an export-led neoliberal strategy for economic growth and economic development? Why is that even today people opposed to this trade openness? They claim that these benefits of globalization and financial integration and trade openness are just an illusion, that they are not going to happen. So let me try to formulate the argument. I'm just going to be reading my notes, and we can talk about this once we be in a live session. Many people believe that because Latin America was not competitive enough, although, like it did happen, Latin America started exporting a higher level of goods and services to the rest of the world. Latin America was flooded with imports because Latin American people, once they saw the openness and the ability to buy better goods and services elsewhere at a lower price, well, guess what? They start importing more. And that produced a deterioration in the trade balance. And that, in some cases, actually produced a balance of payment crisis. Because remember, the bucket, if you start importing more than what you're exporting, the level starts going down, 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 down until it could dry up. And then you have a crisis. This became a very important issue, guys, because of this food security. I'm highlighting this on the screen. Food security is the idea of being dependent on foreign reserves to buy food, but not only food. This includes medicines and other essential goods. So if you think as a country that you're going to have enough reserves in your bucket of the balance of payments to buy food to feed your citizens, to buy medicines to cure your ill population, and suddenly you don't have the resources because you are facing a balance of payments, guess what? Your food security is at risk. I'm not talking about food safety, like diseases. No, I'm talking about the ability to secure, to buy the food that you need to feed the population. So this has been one of the main arguments to offer resistance to trade integration, because again, the fear is we're not ready, guys. Here in Latin America, we don't have the technology, the deteriorating in terms of trade, the policies of other countries. All of this is not working in our favor, and that is very, very risky. The other argument has been this race to the bottom. The race to the bottom accelerates when you open to international trade and international finance, because now multinational corporations have the ability to go faster, deeper, to more places once they are open. So many people consider that trade openness and finance openness have a very negative impact on the environment of Latin American countries. They dump chemicals into the river. They release stuff into the air. And this is not unique to Latin America. I'm sure you have seen many documentaries where this is happening in India, in Pakistan, in Indonesia, all these developing countries that are receiving all these foreign direct investment, all these foreign companies that don't care too much for the local people, for the environment that is hosting them. And as a consequence, that produces a huge problem. Let me give you one example, and I don't want to scare anybody, but I think this is important for you to know, and hopefully it's going to drive home the point. Years ago, here in California, in the 1950s, the 1960s, we had something used as a pesticide called Nemagon. I don't know what I don't remember what the chemical name is, but the commercial name, at least internationally speaking, was Nemagon. Was produced by a company that doesn't exist anymore, Shell. And in Latin America, in California was particularly important because of the heavy agricultural component since the 60s, particularly here in the Valley. So after many studies and after some discoveries, they learned that Nemagon was very harmful to human beings. Birth defects, miscarriages, respiratory problems, neurological problems, and many others. It's a pesticide that was a pesticide that was used heavily in the valley, here in Fresno, Madera, all of these counties around in the valley. Obviously, when the US discovered this, they said, hey, stop, we cannot use this anymore here in the population. Here, we need to stop. So I don't know what was the agency that actually intervened, but Nemagon was banned in California, thankfully. But suddenly they discovered that we had produced tons and tons and tons of Nemagon, and we didn't know what to do with all this stuff. It was a very expensive thing. So they said, well, let's use it in some of the plantations in Central America, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Honduras. Remember, here we have many companies that you probably recognize the name, Dole, Del Monte, Chiquita. They have been producing bananas, pineapples, papayas, mangoes for many, many, many years in Latin America. And they use local labor force. But guess what? Contrary to what normally you would expect, that if you work the land, you own what you produce. Well, not in the case of these multinational corporations. No, they hire labor to come to this land, and they live, they pay them, they are salary workers, and then the companies actually own these pineapples and bananas. So this is another interesting element, because when you think, oh, the more bananas I buy, the more pineapples I eat, I'm helping more people in Latin America. Well, not necessarily, and we can come back to this point later. But the point here is that Nemagon was shipped to Central America. No warnings in the label, nothing, I actually took this picture of this guy when I was in Managua, like 10, 15 years ago, because the effect of the Nemagon takes place 30, 40 years after you have been exposed. And some of these guys were telling me in Spanish, I was working in this park where they had mounted, they were protesting against the national, in front of the National Palace in the Parque Chamorro in Managua, the capital of Nicaragua. They were telling me that, hey man, they start shipping this over from the US. Nobody told us that we should use protective equipment. We're talking about the rainforest, guys. So it's hot, it's humid. And some of these guys were telling me that in the banana plantations, they were spraying this Nemagon, the pesticide. Because of the rain and the heat, they used to collect water from the rain in these huge banana leaves, and they'll just, drink. They start drinking all the water, ingesting all these chemicals. And of course, 30, 40 years later, many people start dying, skin pigmentation problems. You see this guy in the picture, birth defects, renal failure, and eventually they die. So anyway, this is just one example. I have this. To date, it is estimated that more than 20,000 families have been impacted by the Nemagon spraying in the plantations in Nicaragua. This actually was picked up by a court here in Los Angeles a few years ago, and you can read this online. I don't want to spend too much time on this. It's just an example. But this was picked up by a court in California, and they ruled in favor of these families. The problem was that in terms of jurisdiction, you cannot you cannot force a company in the U.S. To pay for damages in another country. But that was not the main problem. The company doesn't exist anymore. So it's a terrible story, really, really awful situation. And the reason I wanted to say that I didn't want to scare anybody is because if you remember a few years ago with the drought here in California, we know that the level of water started going down, down, down. So the the water wells have to be drilled down even further and further. So anyway, I have some friends that work at Gallo in the chemical department, and they start reporting that, in the quality management department, the quality control, they start reporting higher concentrations of chemicals in the water that is supposed to be used for wine. And some of them, were tied to Nemagon that was used 60 years ago here in California. It's not an issue anymore. It's a non-issue. But I'm just trying to give you an example that is tying what's happening in Latin America to here in the valley through this story in Nicaragua. Anyway, I already talked about the race to the bottom effect. Terrible situation, guys. Really, really difficult thing to combat because, like we discussed before, the competition for a market share, the competition for customers, the need to drive prices down to appeal to the consumer can produce really ill behavior among certain entrepreneurs and companies out there. I also said that in many cases, the goods produced in Latin America, especially Central America, bananas, oranges, pineapples, they are produced by local people in the sense that they are farmers working the land, but the produce, the output of this work is owned by multinational corporations, Del Monte, Dole, Chiquita, and of course, the benefits, once again, of that, those transactions don't stay in the home country. They are shipped back to the home country in the form of dividends, in the form of, higher stock prices, and obviously, some people benefit in these home countries, but it's not the workers. Typically, is the landowners that are, lending the land to these corporations, or some partnerships that take place between local rich people and these multinational corporations. Another problem is something called tariff escalation. Even during negotiations for openness to international trade, it's not uncommon to see the following. In this effort to ask developing countries, Latin American countries, to export more raw materials, they say something like this: okay, you can send to my country, for example, the US, as many oranges as you can, tariff free, no problem. We are not going to tax any of the oranges that you send. But what the US is doing is, well, two things. One, they receive the oranges, process the oranges, wash them, cut them, squeeze them, make orange juice, nice packaging, and then they sell them back. I already explained this with the case of oil and gasoline in the case of Mexico, but this is happening with peanut and peanut butters, tomatoes and ketchup, tomato sauce. And the second thing the US does is this. If you guys want to process your oranges and make orange juice, or if you guys want to process your peanuts and make peanut butter or tomato sauce, well, guess what? There is a tariff, because we need to protect our orange juice industry. We need to protect our peanut butter companies. We need to protect, you get the idea? So it's not a fair game. It's not a fair game. They identify strategic industries, because if the competition is too much, they may lose their job and their incomes. No, we need to protect the Florida people oranges, Or here in California, the avocado industry is an interesting one. A few years ago, there was this case where California avocado growers start complaining that the Mexican avocado was penetrating the market too quickly. But you know, that was not the issue. The issue was, and this of course was discovered to be not true later, but they claim that the seed of the avocado had some worms, so that when the seed was disposed, the worm will find its way through land or whatever to the avocado plantations in California, destroying the avocados that they were growing here in California. So immediately there is a dispute before the World Trade Organization. The WTO says, okay, stop any imports of Mexican avocado to the US. We need to launch an investigation to protect the avocado industry. You know, fair game, okay. After months and months and months of research, they discovered that no worm, that was not true. Resume international trade. But in the meantime, the Mexican growers had lost market share. The California growers have recovered. And of course, it was just, you know, one of those not so clean strategies to gain market share or to recover from, you know, a tough competition. It was interesting because during those years, many Mexican producers got mad, very upset, and they said, okay, if you're claiming that the Mexican avocado has a worm in its seed, well, we're going to take the seed out, and they start smashing, put it in cans, and they start shipping guacamole to the US. No seed. So it was a pretty clever response, which I think is kind of fun to talk about. Anyway, so if free trade, the theory and in practice, the claim goes, is so compelling and so many economists are advocating for this, why is that now that Latin America has opened internationally to free trade and international finance, why is that the benefits are not showing up in the population of Latin America? What's going on? Why many countries or why many people in these countries are still poor? Why do we have so many workers in these countries still making barely, you know, enough to make ends meet? Why do we have so much crime? Why do we have so much migration? Why do we have so many people saying, you know, I'm done here. I need to find some answers, some better opportunities, you know? So what's going on? You know, it's obviously it's a tough question to answer, right? I mean, I don't pretend to know fully the answer. So let's sketch some answers, right? So, you know, to try to find some idea of what the explanation to this observation could be. Okay, so the question is, why, if international trade is in theory so good and international finance is so beneficial, why now that Latin America, after the Washington Consensus and after the collapse of ISI and dependency theory, and after all this IMF, World Bank conditionality, why Latin America is still not what it's supposed to be, right? Okay, so here's one. The HO theory ignores the key question of how a country comes to be technologically advanced. So that's what I said before. The theory assumes that once you have two countries move from a no trade to a trade position, they are starting at a more or less equal place. The theory doesn't say, okay, how is that one country is here? What happens when one country is here and one country is here? They just ignore, the theory just ignored that question, completely, you know, assumes that that's not going to happen. The theory also ignores this notion of deteriorating terms of trade that we have discussed already. You know, in theory, the mathematical model predicts, once again, this equalization of prices of goods and services, factors of production, but in practice, that has not happened. The terms of trade deterioration is one example. The fact that, just to give you an idea, the minimum wage in the US is, roughly speaking, 10 times higher than the minimum wage in Mexico. 10 times higher. In some regions, it's even higher than 10 times. So obviously, if you have an equalization of prices of milk, of electricity, cereal, but you don't have an equalization of salaries, what do you expect? Many minimum wage earners in Mexico are struggling significantly. And, something similar is happening in Central America and in some South American countries. The wage disparities are huge, so that they need to start finding alternatives. When I go back to Mexico to visit my family, my dad or whatever, I am surprised to see that many of the things that we normally buy, I already mentioned a few, electricity, what else did I say? But anyway, bread, milk, toothpaste, a brush, I mean, basic items. You would expect that, oh, they are so cheap in Mexico. Well, not so much. I mean, they are probably a bit cheaper once you control for the exchange rate, but you would be surprised how expensive they are if you are making money in Mexican pesos. It's a whole different, I mean, I'm okay because I go there and I'm making money in dollars, make the exchange, and I spend the money in Mexican pesos. I'm fine. But people living in Mexico are not saying the same thing. Here is another interesting idea. Ricardo's idea, David Ricardo, he assumed that international trade, and of course Adam Smith as well, that international trade was taking place between two independent, totally individual, separate countries. But remember, we already talked about this. The complexity of international trade in the 20th century, and obviously the 21st century, is so high that it's very difficult to distinguish whether a good is German or Mexican or Indian or whatever, because especially the high value added goods have components of so many different countries. Think about a computer, think about a car, think about a medical equipment, think about a tractor. The brand name may sound that it belongs to a particular country, but when you look at the components of that good, it's not so easy to distinguish, to separate, as Ricardo did. And obviously this is taken advantage by multinational corporations of rich nations, because they can take advantage of cheap labor, cheap resources, race to the bottom effects, and many other things to reduce cost and gain market share. But who is paying for these low prices that we as consumers enjoy? Somebody else. Somebody else, typically in a developing country, typically farmers, typically workers in factories. They are absorbing this reduction in cost that we enjoy as low prices. Anyway, the CEPAL, once again, the organization in Latin America that in the 60s was pushing for, dependency theory and structuralism. They have been talking about, more or less recently, about open regionalism. Once again, the idea that we need to figure out ways, Latin American countries, to start joining forces and figure out ways to develop our own technology. If rich countries are not going to share this technology, we need to develop our own indigenous technologies, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in construction, anything in ag, food technology. But obviously, developing this technology requires a huge injection of resources, a huge amount of capital that many Latin American countries, even when they join forces, don't have. Another problem is that Latin American countries, as similar as they may look like, most of them speak Spanish, they have the same history or similar history, colonialism, Spanish, Catholicism, endowed with natural resources. There are a lot of similarities. There are a lot of differences, particularly size. So it is not uncommon that countries are trying to become dominant in the region. For example, Mexico said, you guys in the South, look at yourselves. I'm going north. So I am going to join forces with the US and Canada. Brazil is seen as one of the potential countries that can take over. If you ever had some sort of integration in South America, well, the Brazilian economy and the population is so large that more likely they are going to be the dominant country of that block, if you will. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not the countries. I'm not trying to vilify the US or Germany in Europe leading the European Union. No. It's the system. The system that we have created around the world has the incentive, provides the incentives for this protagonistic type of hunger. If you can become a leader of a particular bloc, Japan in Asia, or China more recently, Germany in Europe, the US in North America, well, we may have Brazil taking over, which is not necessarily going to translate to benefits to countries like El Salvador. So tiny, relatively speaking, so far away from Brazil. So we need to think about that as well. There is this paper in your reading list in 2003, Getting Things Right at Home by Omar Sanchez. And you can see some of the, what he considers the recipe for success. If we try to get things right at home, meaning getting things right in Latin America. The first thing that they need to do is to increase domestic savings, which is very difficult to do because when you barely have enough to survive, how are you going to save? The problem is that if countries don't save, they cannot invest. Investment has to come from overseas. And overseas investment, foreign investment, has interest that do not necessarily align with the domestic interest that the population living in that country want to pursue. So this is key element. How do we increase the rate of savings in the country? I don't have the answer for that. There are some cultural elements. Let me give you one, just to give you an idea of what I mean by this. There, in many communities in Latin America, there is this distrust or mistrust of the financial system. So sometimes people prefer, literally, I'm sure you have heard this expression of putting your money under the mattress rather than opening a savings account. Well, in many Latin American countries like Mexico, it's true. Many people don't go to the bank. They prefer to keep their money in cash, bills, and coins and put it in a safe place in the house. So if you multiply one family by millions of families, all these savings never make it to the financial system, to the income stream that could be used for investment. So this cultural element is reducing the ability of Latin America in terms of savings for investing. So it's just a cultural element that, well, plays a role here too. Counter-cyclical fiscal policies, mobilizing public resources, I prefer to concentrate on this one. Investing in education. If Latin America really wants to play in the big leagues, if Latin America really wants to create indigenous technology capable of competing with the technologies produced in other countries, and if Latin America wants to reduce these consequences of cultural behaviors that are not so good for development, they need to invest in education. Huge investment in education. Not just instruction in terms of knowledge, science, math. I'm talking about a broader term, education. The future, guys, requires workers that are mobile, that they are multilingual, that they understand different cultures, that they are open to understand things that are not necessarily similar to what they are used to. In many Latin American countries, the vast majority of the population are not like that. They only speak one language. They are very low schooling level, very close-minded, not very open to try new foods, new music, new places. They don't travel very much. This is not good. This is not good because the workforce that globalization requires has very different characteristics, the ones I already described. So the longer we delay in taking care of these issues in Latin America, well, the longer it's going to take to really foster economic development, and it's going to keep costing, well, lives, literally. Children die of starvation, not in the same at the same level of places in Africa and in other countries, but certainly there is some communities in Latin America that are having a really, really rough time. They don't have access to drinkable water, to electricity, to sewage, and some of them don't have access to medicine, food, education. It's tough for many, especially indigenous communities in Mexico, guys. Anyway, I think I'm going to stop here. This is a very interesting section in my mind that has to do with international trade. We are going to have a break of a week, spring break. I will continue with a new section on Monday after spring break. Again, if you have questions or comments, always reachable through email or stop by during office hours. Thank you, guys. Bye.